Do not confuse this with treatment or mental health advice or direction. Nothing on this podcast is made to supplement or supersede the relationship and direction of your mental health caretakers. Although David Kozlowski is a licensed marriage and family therapist, he is not functioning as a certified mental health professional in this environment. And same applies to any professional who may appear on the Light the Fight podcast. Welcome to the OG Therapy.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of OG Therapy. I'm your host, David, and today we've got a very special guest, my man, Kenneth Scott. Ooh. Now, for those of you who don't know Kenneth, let me tell you a very personal bio and introduction of him. What's most important to me right now is that he's an amazing father, got 2 great kids, got a beautiful lady, been together for
12, 13 years.
12, 13 years. So you definitely are an OG when it comes to the serious relation, kid type life. So, and also, we'll get into this in just a second, but he was here for the weekend here in Utah for a special weekend. In fact, is it safe to say one of the biggest weekends of your life?
Biggest. Huge.
So we're going to talk about that because I want to know all about how that experience was, because before the podcast, we didn't talk about it because I wanted to talk about it here, so it's still fresh. And I was there to witness what happened yesterday. But also, too, he and I have a little bit of history we'll get into in the podcast as well. I wanted him to be the first guest on OG Therapy podcast because we have a little bit of history talking into these bad boys right here, these mics. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, David, were you a rapper with Kenneth? Possibly. Were you in his group? Hopefully you weren't thinking that. I was not a rapper with Kenneth. I was not in his group. He and I didn't do like a 2-man solo. If I was working with Kenneth on the stage, I'd definitely be holding the towel.
The hype man. We in there.
I'd be the hype man. They'd be like, man, they must have grown up together for him to give him a job. I like your homeless friend that you just gave me a job. Right?
Hey, you got to stick together. That's the main thing about it.
That's right. That's right. No, we'll talk about a little bit how this is not our first time talking to some microphones, but it is full circle coming back. And I look forward to talking about the good old days in just a minute.
I'm super excited. Yeah. I was just watching those videos probably like a couple weeks ago. So I was prepping for this.
You're prepping for it? Okay. Is it funny like how we looked back then?
Dude, I didn't have no facial hair.
You looked hella young. Like, and I never say hella, but he looked hella young back then.
It's a California thing. But
it is a California thing.
Yeah, I look
Utah, they say hecka.
Yeah.
Hecka young.
They use a lot of unexplicit language. So
I call Utah County curse words. Or one of my students say secondary curse words. I like that one too.
I'm going to start using that.
Secondary curse words. Well, let's start about for the weekend though. Let's jump right into it. So tell everybody what brought you here not that you haven't been to Utah. What was the purpose, first of all? Why were you asked to come?
The purpose was for me to perform at halftime.
Okay, perform at halftime like with a cello or a violin?
Oh, no. We was rocking the whole show, baby. We was rocking the whole show, performing my hit song, Rise Up. One of the other ones is Go Crazy, but mainly Rise Up, performing that. That's
now,
beautiful.
What about these songs? Because I'm sure there's a lot of former players at the University of Utah that have a SoundCloud.
Yep.
Maybe that's putting some beats out there. Some of them might be good. Some might be good.
Right.
Why did they ask you? Because usually they don't tell someone to rip something off their computer and perform it in front of, 50,000 people.
Right. It's relationships. That's everything is based off of that. My network, being able to connect with certain people and build off the foundational premise of the relationship is what afforded me the opportunity.
And those relationships got your song even used last year, right? So talk about why this song was so important to the University of Utah football team.
Man, it was so important not only because it connected with the team, but because everything that was accumulated with the deaths of the former players, but also my connection with the staff and the relationships I built with the social media crew, the different departments. In my relationship in the music industry, with the ties that I have with the producer industry, all of our relationships just kind of
came together naturally.
Yeah, organically, very organically.
So tell everybody what the 2 songs are about.
So Rise Up was about our march into becoming a Pac-12 champion when we beat Oregon, twice in a year. But it was basically the journey of that. And then Go Crazy is the celebration of getting to those moments. Yeah. Like, man, let's go crazy now. We are who we are.
Yeah, where can people check those out? Because I listen to work out almost every day now. Those are like 2 of my favorite hype songs to get me going. So where can people listen to those?
They can listen it on iTunes, any streaming platform. Okay. So whether you got an old school Android or a new iPhone, you can download any streaming platform, you'll be able to get it.
Yeah, definitely, especially if you're a University of Utah fan. If you're not a University of Utah fan, just pretend they're saying your team's name in it. But so they had you come out perform for the weekend, but not just the performance, but they had a lot of other stuff set up for you as well. So
it was beautiful. Starting off when I first came off the plane, literally like an hour into it,
met with Brandon at Little Caesars, did a partnership thing with them, which afforded a lot of opportunities for free food for them so they can go crazy on
the crazy bread, right?
The crazy bread.
Yeah.
And what's cool is that on the crazy bread, it had go crazy on it.
They put it on there?
No, it was already on there. And I had that idea back.
Little Caesars corporate should be hollering at you, right?
That's what I'm saying. Building this thing. You know how it all came about?
How?
Because of a relationship.
Really? With who?
One of the alumni, employees in the alumni relationships office, knows somebody in the corporate office of Little Caesars. They're best friends, and so she reached out to her. And I was just like, "Hey,"
and because that, a bunch of students got free food.
Boom.
There you go. You're welcome, the Muss and all the students at the University of Utah, because that was the promotion, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So they can, get hype for the game and also get more people into the game early, so they can.
That's true. That's true.
So incentive.
Now, also, you were working. You spoke during your time that you're here as well. So, why don't you talk about who are the people you spoke to and why were you there in the first place?
Yeah, so went to the Black Alumni Association, which is pretty cool. Built some relationships with a new position that they put in charge, which is the HBCU partnerships. Yeah. So that was cool. Get familiar with them. Built a relationship with a board member that's on the Black Alumni, and just doing some strategic type of items. Songfest crew, student board. Just building those relationships and networking. So that was the main motivating factor for me is in the alumni relationships office. Like, how can we build and improve relationships of our alumni to come back so we can move it forward?
Yeah, and this is probably a good time to add in there. If you haven't picked up on this is the relationship guy.
For sure.
Like Kenneth, that's one thing that just immediately when I met you, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I realized that this is the type of guy that you could drop you anywhere, any country, any neighborhood.
True.
He was like, drop Kenneth off, and next within 20 minutes, he's got 2 different jobs.
Yeah.
And then people are like, he's like, oh, this is my friend, so-and-so. I'm like, you've been here for 2 minutes, Kenneth. Yeah, but we're buddies.
We know for lifetime.
We connected. Yeah. Right? He's, you definitely have, whenever I see you have like a Noah's Ark of people around. You get like 2 of these kind of people, 2 of those type of people. You definitely draw a lot of people towards you, and so it doesn't surprise me that they'd say, "Hey, we want to start building relationships with student athletes. We want to start doing some new things here at the University of Utah, or just improve and add to some things we've already been doing." That they would reach out to you, and so obviously working with the Black student alumni, right? Who else were you working while you're here on this trip? Because you got done playing football. What year? What was
2015.
2015. Even though that wasn't that long ago, there's new faces
for sure
at the U.
Without a doubt.
And a lot of people, especially the diehard fans, but a lot of people still know who you are because you've been active with the University of Utah, athletic department community. Right. But this time it was different. So you met with certain people. What were some other people you talked to here at the University of Utah this weekend?
One of the biggest people I met, obviously, because he's the head of everything, is the president of the University of Utah.
Oh, really? You got to sit down with the president?
Got to sit down with him and meet with him. And
man, I sat down with the president one time, but it was for a disciplinary issue. So, and I don't think he wanted to meet with me. So I want to let's about you. I bet you they wanted to talk to you. That's great.
It was amazing. It was right after. It was right after the performance, and he commented on the performance, and we started talking about some things, and as far as events and some future items that they wanted to incorporate in the university. And one of the things like, what could you bring to us that can innovate, change, things of that nature. And so we're building a plan right now, right?
Right on.
And it's talking about that. But I do have to give kudos to you, because if it wasn't for the beginning of when I remember this vividly, you said, in order to connect, you have to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is the key to connection. And ever since I became vulnerable with everything that I've done, giving people that window pane to see who I am truly, not trying to do the perceived value of, whatever it is, trying to chase that avatar, people connect with me so much because of it. And that was all because of Quit Tripping.
Well, they're meeting the best parts of you up front instead of you fronting up front.
Yeah,
because
I love it.
Because 18-year-old Kenneth Scott, we talked about that a long time ago with a lot of 18-year-old young men coming to high school to football. You're walking around with a little chip on your shoulder, a little ego, and you're worrying about like who you could trust and stuff.
True.
But you've learned throughout a lot of time that, man, you put yourself out there first. Next thing you know, people start putting themselves out there, and you get to know people for who they really are. You're not meeting their PR person, right? You're not needing their public relationship representative.
That's true. And so I've learned so much through it, man. And every interaction I have with someone, I always tell them, just be vulnerable with me. Let me know the real you so we can connect. And once we finally connect, then we're able to build on a relationship.
Yeah, and also too, like most people want to we get used to hearing like, how you doing? How's it going? Fine. Okay, whatever. But whenever you have that moment to have them, like that time where someone asks a question, someone says something, even if you're standing in line, it can create a laugh. It can create like some sort of connection. Like, oh, you know, so-and-so. Like, oh, I'm a fan of that team too.
So true.
Just those even intimate connections don't have to take a long time as long as someone's willing to go first.
Without a doubt. And so big kudos to you providing that OG therapy. No pun intended to the podcast, but it allowed me to see things from a bigger view.
Well, let's talk about that then, and about why it was so important that I wanted Kenneth to be my first guest on OG Therapy. So let's talk about how we first met, and obviously we don't have to go down a big long thing because it wasn't like you met your lady. That'd be a better story. Like me, it's like, yeah, I met this dude one time.
Yeah.
But talk about how we first met, and then give the listeners a little bit more information when you say like, because you're saying, and I appreciate the compliment and stuff, but it's hard to explain to people what it was like coming to those groups and stuff. So just kind of tell people how we first met, who we met through, and then we'll talk about those groups and why you're able to learn that, man, you know, if you go first, you put yourself out there, you may not connect with everybody, but it definitely increases the probability that a more meaningful connection is available.
You know what's crazy? I think it was 2013. I was supposed to have a big season, and first game, 9 plays in.
I was there at that first game.
Man, 9 plays in.
I had good seats to watch your leg.
Ooh, that thing was ugly. I couldn't feel it.
Say what happened.
So 9 plays in the game. I was blocking the defender. My running back gets tackled, lands on my ankle, out for the season.
Snap City.
So it was about like a week or two, maybe about a month or so. A big, huge Utah fan comes and slides in my DMs.
He may be in this room.
Maybe or maybe not. We don't know, you know. And so he's like, hey, how would you like to come speak to some kids? And I was like, I'll never turn that down, you know. And so I'm getting ready I'm in my head, I'm got a speech going on. Like, okay, what am I about to say? Boop, boop, boop. I come in, everybody just sitting in a circle. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a different type of approach.
Because you're used to going to speaking to youth,
right? And he comes to me and says, oh yeah, this is our prevention group. And so I'm like, okay. So I bring my lady in there with me, and she was like,
because you were coming in on
a scooter.
On a scooter,
yeah, I'm riding, you know. And she tells me like, are we coming to the right place? Like. And so Brandon comes and, you know, that's how we introduced him. So we get into the group and everybody starts talking. I'm like, holy crud. And it kind of
got deep real quick, huh?
It got deep real quick. And I was like, oh, shoot. And so experiencing that was on a whole nother level. And
you were just a member of the group. So the way we had it is we'd have athletes, we'd have local people that were like either successful athletically or in some way musicians. And they would always come in thinking they're going to talk to the kids, sit down, and they were just a member of the group. And so we asked them to share openly, just like the kids in the group share.
Right.
And so you got that experience off the bat. You're like, oh, maybe this is for me too, not just for the kids.
And that was my biggest takeaway from it. I was like, man, I came to this group thinking something else as far as I'm going to be providing a service for them, when really they did so much for me and provided so much value in return. And I was like, man, whatever this experience is, I'm going to try to mimic this in whatever I do. And so that's what happened.
And like always, I mean, the kids loved you. Like they instantly came running up to you.
Man.
And I remember when you'd come back and visit again, you'd see some of them, you'd make comments like, oh, you changed your hair. And that made them feel really special that you would even remember who they were. And that, you know, that they even changed their hairstyle. And I know because you have spoken to many youth that you can see that twinkle in their eye when they're like, something you said connected with their life. You don't know what their life is. You don't know how you, being of a different age, sometimes different ethnicity, different background, you don't know how you could possibly connect with what they're going through. But something that we talked about before the podcast, I know that you said you like that saying, is we compete, right?
With our strengths, connect with our weaknesses. And you gotta get that tagline. That's beautiful.
Well, that's it's not her. She didn't make it up, but I forget where she originally heard. But Heidi, right? You remember Heidi, right?
Yeah.
So Heidi that's like one of her favorite things that she would always say. So we were talking before the podcast, and when you came to those groups, you learned pretty quickly that these kids, it didn't matter if they're rich, poor,
doesn't matter.
Didn't matter where they came from, what they looked like. I mean, we had kids that were like, you know for a fact they wouldn't have been friends if they hung out and met in high school.
Doubt. Yep.
They did not have the same circles or the same type of interest, but for some reason, when they're there, they can put their guard down. They could be real. They could be vulnerable. and having guests like you to come in and you were being vulnerable with them, it made them feel special because usually they would see an adult come in and they'd be a little scared or intimidated. But then when you'd be vulnerable in front of them or anyone that would come in, but especially you, because they really loved you, they would always go, oh my gosh, like I never would have guessed that he was like that. And you could have never guessed if you seen some kid with, you know, purple hair or like, you know, dressing all like a skater. You would never guess that they were so sensitive.
True.
That they like just wanted their parents to pay attention to them or that they just wanted a friend. Because on the outside, we all wear those like that armor, you know?
Yep.
But inside those groups, it broke those down. And because you were loved so much by the kids, I was offered an opportunity to do a radio show, a late night radio show on ESPN 700, the local ESPN. And I was like, I remember I hit you up one day. I'm like, hey man, you want to be the host? And you remember what your response was?
Boom.
Just like that. He's like, when do we start? Let's
Tell
do
me
it.
when.
And it worked out too, because you were already working with ESPN 700. So he had the relationships, right? This is obviously a common topic you're going to hear in this podcast today. He had the relationships with people there. So for me, they're like, oh, who's going to be your co-host? I said, Kenneth Scott. Like, oh, done deal. They're like, okay. I didn't have to like get you approved or nothing like that. Like, oh, we love Kenneth. And you were just done playing football. So, you know, again, like everyone else trying to figure out what you want to do. And in those episodes, we had the pleasure, I believe, to really get to see a totally different side of a lot of local celebrities, former athletes, broadcasters, dancers, reality show guys, right? But we got to see a different side of them. And I figured out what was the secret sauce about having you. Kenneth, if I would describe it, you were like, if you were a type of music, and this is a compliment. Obviously, I love hip hop music, right? We both love hip hop music. But your vibe is you're like anti-road rage hip hop.
Right. Yep.
Like there's something about you, like your vibe is like every guest would come in, you're like, what's up? Like they would look at me kind of like, oh, what's this fool going to ask me? Like everybody knows I'm a counselor. Like, oh, he's going to try to get me to cry on TV. But as soon as they'd meet you, they'd be like, okay, Kenneth, like you were like the emotional support human. Like you were the one that like made everybody feel comfortable.
I love that.
Where I was the person, people were like, I don't know about him.
That's a soundbite. I'm going to take that. I'm a soundbite.
You were literally the emotional support human. You were like the ultimate hype man for these people there.
Man.
So you just made everyone feel safe and secure and just comfortable. And at the time, I just kind of intuitively knew that. But I wanted to tell you that because I don't think I ever told you that out loud. We had a lot of great shows. Man. And the reason why it was working so well, if I didn't have you, it would have been an awkwardness. But having you there just kind of like just calm the air. Everybody felt comfortable. I'd go to the bathroom, take a break, come back. You'd be saying something, having them laughing, joking around.
Yeah.
Like it was perfect that way. Did you feel that way as well when you were doing the radio show?
Man, it was amazing. I was like, man, I wish we could have stayed on that course and because it could have been something huge. This was basically a podcast in a way.
We were the first now they do podcasts. See, they didn't have, I don't think they understood what we were doing because the numbers we were showing them were through Facebook Lives. Nobody was doing anything live back then.
That's true.
And we were showing them all these numbers that they were like, what does that mean? Those are better numbers than we get on the radio show. They were confused, didn't really know what to do with us. And in my issue back then was I didn't really know what I was asking for. You know, sometimes when you get a speaking gig or you get something that comes your way that you just take it.
Yep.
And you're like, dang, I probably should have got paid for this or I should have made a lot more money for it.
For sure.
But you're just thinking, and we talked about this before the podcast, we just needed reps. Like I knew I just needed to get on the microphone and just getting reps. Now, of course, years later, I've had this podcast, Light the Fight podcast. This is OG Therapy, a new version of it.
Right.
But all those years of doing Light the Fight podcast, I already had experience on the ESPN radio show. I did a podcast with KSL for a while. So by the time I really did my own podcast, it was already more fine-tuned. And I think for anyone that wants to get into podcasting or into radio or something like that, you just need practice at what you're doing.
That's true.
So for you and I both, I don't know about for you, but for me, I learned a lot from that and just getting to learn talking to the mic. Was that helpful to you as well? Because you speak a lot now.
Man, heck yeah. Looking back at it, I'm like, man, there's so many small things I wish I'd have done better.
Oh, of course.
But
me too.
It was good practice. And I actually brung it up to one of my friends like, man, we actually co-hosted on ESPN 700. Like, it's ESPN. Like, those letters is engraved into everybody's mind. And now that we're talking about it, your idea was the pioneer of it all.
Just get OGs to talk about their deepest, darkest stuff because people that okay, let's talk about this for a second. this is OG therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But when someone says OG to you, like, what do you really think? Do you think of a person like just got lucky and just everything went their way?
Mm-mm.
What do you think when you hear about OG? Because that's kind of what we're doing. We're interviewing OGs on the radio show.
Right. A person that just experienced all the hardships, and now they're taking everything that they encompass, everything that they accumulated and learned through those hardships. Now they're just trying to give back the game to the younger generation so that they can be better and forthcoming about their information. And so one of the things I always tell people is like, man, one of the phrases I say is, man, if I knew back then what I know now, I'd be. And being in the OG situation, you already have the answer to what you just stated. Now you're giving them the answer so that it can expedite their process along the way to become whoever they want to become. And so an OG expedites a YG or a BG process and becoming on the path to success.
And for those people who don't understand me, we'll make it very clear. So an OG, the literal terminology for an OG back in the day, when I first did the podcast, I had to do a little intro. I'm like, everybody uses the word OG now, but I think older people sometimes don't really know what it means. It's a little hood.
Yes, it very. Yeah, you got two versions. You got the older gentleman, or you have, which you probably gonna say right
older
now,
gangster.
There you go,
older gangster. And the older gangster, they were in it for a long time.
Yes,
and
entrenched.
And you tell me what you think. It's always to me like, the literal terminology in older gangster, the person that was from a neighborhood, maybe they got shot, went to jail. They had to go through a lot of horrible stuff, come back, but they don't got the energy for that no more. Nope. They're not trying to go back to prison.
I'm good.
They're not trying I've been there, done that.
Yep.
So because they've been there and done that, they get a pass from everybody else. And they're like, hey, listen, why don't you be kind of like the medicine woman or man for our tribe now? Like, meaning, why don't you give us the information that's medicine for us? Why don't you help us? And you always see like OGs from that perspective have the highest amount of respect.
Yep, without a doubt.
In the neighborhoods and families. But then it started to get more loosely terminology for, I was seeing like one of my uncles, George Malifua, I've talked about him before on the podcast. He was an OG for me in my life. He was never a gangster. He was just a big, tough guy. Everybody respected. But what made him so like honorable, why everybody liked him so much, is that he didn't use his toughness to intimidate people. He actually would make people feel comfortable around him. He was this dangerous man that chose not to be dangerous. And that's what made his words carry a lot of weight. And so I want to hear from you, like, it's not really what an OG says. Sometimes it's how they say it.
Yep, and how they move. And how do they move? Real G's move what?
In silence.
That's how we do it.
and what Kenneth is saying is like, people that really have wisdom, they don't got to tell everybody else they're being stupid.
Exactly.
People have wisdom sometimes, like, oh, go ahead, knock yourself out. Like, they're like,
they already know the outcome.
I can't talk that fool out of that doing that. But from this perspective, from the podcast, that's what it really was. Like, I wanted to give opportunities for people like you, who you in your own right, even though you're younger, you are an OG because you have a lot of wealth, of knowledge, and information. You've lived a lot of things, or went through a lot of things in the short period of time that you've been on this earth. And I want to get in that a little bit because I called this OG therapy. Because throughout the years of my life that, I was adopted, I went through, everybody has their own story. Everybody's gone through their own stuff. But the stuff that I went through when I got into graduate school to become a therapist and do counseling psychology, I really wanted to be good at what I did. So when they taught me all this stuff, you're trying to be a good boy. Like, okay, they tell you, don't do this, don't do this. And it's really structured, and they scare you not to like getting too close to people. Right. Because if you get too close to them, then they could take advantage of you, you can take advantage of them, which can happen. Right. And in professional relationships, you want to keep it professional. But in this profession, the job is you have to get people to tell you their most deepest, darkest secrets, hurt and pain, but you can't get close to them to get them to tell you that.
That's a fine line.
So that was a hard thing for me. So I created this version of the podcast so that I could take all the stuff I learned from psychology in school, my experience, years working with people, and I could combine that with my life experiences, and that's OG therapy. And I've been doing that for years, and that's what made me successful in my own type of therapy as a licensed therapist. And I know for you as a speaker with youth and all the things you're doing your own OG therapy. So I don't think, even though OG therapy is something I came up with, I don't think it's exclusive to me. Hence the reason I wanted you on the podcast, because you do your own version of OG therapy that is influential. In fact, it's so influential, the University of Utah and many of the top people, including the present top person of the organization, want to be associated with you. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk to you for a minute about how you got the OG part of the therapy. And I want to bring up the book that you wrote about your mom.
Yeah.
So I didn't say this in your bio because I know this is, you got other books that you're planning on writing, stuff like that. So a couple things I didn't mention in the bio is you got a TED Talk coming up in a couple weeks.
Yep.
Okay. You'll be part of the team.
Woo! TED Talk team.
I was so proud when I found it when Brand's like, dude, Kenneth got a TED Talk. I'm like,
boom.
I'm like, man, I wonder how many we might be the only 2 wide receivers from the University of Utah that have ever had a TED Talk.
The only.
I can't think of any others. If you're out there, let us know.
Do we have any?
We'll start like a support group. I don't know.
Do we have any University of Utah alum? That'll be a good fun fact.
Brandon, check that out. Yeah, that might be a good. We may be. If KD got a TED Talk and I didn't know about it, I'm gonna be bummed.
Yeah, me too.
So Kevin Dyson, I'm gonna send this to you.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But he should have one though, just so.
Without a doubt, let's plug that.
Yeah, let's plug that. So we may be the only University of Utah athletes.
Wow.
Definitely the only 2 wide receivers at a TED Talk.
Wow.
And I want to ask you about that. And I wanted to share with our listeners that you have that coming up. But real quick, before we get into the book, so what is your TED Talk going to be about? Is it going to be about this experience, something related to this?
Quite frankly enough, my TED Talk is going to be more around social health and how basically pressure is no match for purpose. However, you must cultivate a legacy-driven mindset. And so obviously relationships is a big part of it. And so that encompasses the theme of the whole thing is if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? That's the theme of it. So
boom. I love it.
I'm excited. I
love it. And obviously you can't talk about too much till after you do it.
Right.
We'll have you come back on and talk again about it.
Can't wait.
Let's talk about that legacy. Okay. I got this off Amazon. If any of you guys wonder how you get it, it's called 24, My Life's Journey Through Being a Mom, Lupus, and Kidney Transplant by Latricia Banks and Kenneth Scott.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to talk about this for a second because as I mentioned here on OG Therapy, you're the first, but giving people that are real OGs the opportunity to talk about how you became an OG. OGs don't become that way, experienced and wise, without experiencing through a lot of hardship, pain, problems, and even some bad mistakes.
True.
Sometimes people got to go through their own fire that they created, not just the one that life threw at you. And as I was reading this, a question came to my mind, and it came off of a chapter in this book. And the chapter is called Going Back to Cali.
Yep.
So I'm reading this, and by the way, I think I told you yesterday, this past year I lost my biological mom, COVID situation, and I love my grandmother who raised me a few years ago. I was reading this, and in that chapter, it's your mom talks about, because these are her journals, right?
Yep.
So these are journals that he compiled. So why don't you say real quick about the book, and then I'll say about the chapter real quick.
Yeah. So basically the book is the black and white, meaning my mother's journals that she written, and all I did was add color to it, made it more flavorful, made it flow. And so that's what it all is, her daily journals that she written down. And I just took a collection of stories and implemented into book form.
And the name 24 was because?
24 is the amount of years that she lived once she was diagnosed with lupus.
And in that specific chapter, his mom was talking about when you were really young, that she would take you to all of her treatments. So I believe it was dialysis.
Yep.
Right. And she said he was able to be with me by my side the whole entire time through all my dialysis treatments. And then when he got to a certain age, they said he can't come back no more.
Right.
And she said that was really hard for her, that you couldn't be there by her side, and that she had to teach you how to take care of yourself. Like you had to be at home by yourself, because obviously there wasn't a lot of family, a lot of support. There's a little bit, but not like all the time. And so the question I want to ask you is that even though you may not remember all those times when you're by your mom's side, what do you think being by your mom's side as a young man, from your earliest memories, even before then, all the way into I think you were like 8 years old, 9 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
What do you think about those experiences gave you a different vantage point? Maybe it gave you parts of your character. Maybe it helps you in ways today that you can look back and point back to that saying, those things I went through with my mom really had a huge change in who I am. Because I said before the podcast, there's some theories in psychology that believe that if we go through some things in our early childhood development, sometimes those things could literally create your path of who you want to be and who you want to become. Now, I've seen it. I'm just wondering, I want to ask you, because when I read that, dude, it gave me chicken skin. Just gave me chicken skin and goosebumps. So what do you think about those experiences with your mom throughout all the time when you're a little boy has made you who you are today?
Man, probably so one of the biggest phrases my mom used to use was everything's going to be all right. And so I remember one night, in our 600 square foot apartment, we have thin walls. And so one night I heard some soft crying, muttering, some erratic breathing coming from the other side of the wall. And so it was late at night. I thought I was hearing things. So I get out of my bed, I walk over to the wall and I put my ear to it. And as I started listening more in depth, the sobbing and the crying became more frequent and intensified to the point where I eventually just dropped down to the floor with my face covered in tears because I couldn't bear to hear her on the other side crying because she was trying to figure out how she was going to be able to cope with everything, like emotionally, physically, mentally, all that, And so, I asked my mom, Mom, you okay? And then everything's going to be all right. And I knew the answer, right? I knew, because my mother's so strong-willed. She want to, even though she may be feeling a certain way, she would try to perceive a certain reality that was different. And so I asked her again, kind of more firm, like, Mom, are you okay?
You're like, it doesn't sound like you're okay.
Right. And she was like, everything going to be all right, son, I promise. And so that phrase to me, no matter what I do in life, 20 years, so basically 2 decades just dominated by the illness and just scraping by, that phrase to me, just inside of me, that no matter what, everything gonna be all right, no matter what it is. So that moment right there, I remember vividly because I had to, see her coming home from dialysis, and I had to get a little rolly chair, sit around it, move her around the house. So those are some challenging times for me, but it also was a motivating factor for me to make sure everything was gonna be all right.
When you're saying about when Brandon had reached out to you on Twitter and said, hey, could you come speak to some youth? And you're like, Of course, right away. Mm-hmm. He couldn't have got to you any other way. Mm-mm. There's no way, because what you're telling me, that young man that was waiting for your mom to come home, that was standing on the other side of that wall, that young man, she was telling you, son, I know you love me, but you can't save me. You can't save me from this. I got this. I'm gonna take care of this.
Yep.
And I only messaged her a few times while we were doing the radio show. I talked to her a couple times when she called in. So I never really got to have that personal relationship with her. But the way you describe her is definitely like, she's like, I got this. Like, I got this. Like, you get your thing, I get my thing. When she was reading this, that she had to teach you how to do that for yourself. She said it was really hard for you to not be there for her because I think selfishly, she wanted you by her side all the time.
For sure.
I don't think she wanted you to go, but she knew that you had to live a life without her, preparing you for what ultimately was going to have to happen someday.
Right. And that's another childhood thing for me, growing up without my father, a little background about my father. He's a hairstylist, men and women. And so early on in his younger years, he was very famous in the Houston area. They call him the Great Kenneth Scott because I'm
really
named after him. Nobody knows that.
Kenneth Scott. I didn't know that either.
Yeah, my dad's named the Great Kenneth Scott. Nobody knows that because I just don't have that relationship with him, and I don't want to be connected with him just because of the character and the value. So I just didn't want to. I wanted to be separate.
Have your own identity, even though you have the same name. Okay.
And so he made a decision, which kind of swayed my decision later on in life. He was like, I'm going to keep chasing this fame and fortune. Even though I know your mother's sick, I know I have a son, I'm going to keep going this way. It was more
whether he realized or not, he did not put relationships first.
Right. He was focused on himself. And I learned through my mother that the beauty is serving others. And so early on, all the anger that I had with my dad, I'm never going to be like him. I'm always going to be serving people. That was like my main thing, serving, because that's my mom. I remember going to Food for Less, and we had our food stamps, and someone in front of us who looked to be wealthy and had some money, their car gets declined. My mom, without a doubt, was like, here, I have food stamps. We'll pay for your food off food stamps. And I'm looking at my mom like, yo.
You're like, well, who's going to give us their food stamps? Is there someone behind us going to give us their
food
stamps?
I'm like, yo, come on now. Like, we only got a certain budget every month that we give. But it was those random acts of kindness from my mom that I seen. And, she always thought outside of herself. Yesterday at the game, a photographer came up to me and was like, I loved your mom so much. When my sister had gone missing, your mother was the first person that reached out to me and kept reaching out to me until my sister got found. I never knew that.
Just some random photographer that your mom started talking to, became friends with back when you were playing, right?
Back when I never knew that.
Wow.
And another lady who gave me another book, she was talking about how someone was having suicidal moments, and my mother talked to him. I didn't know that either. So behind the closed doors, my mother just always had a serving feeling, and I think that's what, I get from her.
Thanks for just being so real and so open with your answers. You and I have talked for a very long time about deep personal stuff, and I know that you'll laugh at a good joke, but you'll also be honest with a deep question too. And when I was reading the book, I was just kind of thinking, like, what should I ask him, about his mom in the book? And when I came across that chapter, of course, it caught my eye by the name of the chapter, going back to Cali. And so the chapters was mom moved from Texas to California to live with her sister. Right. And that was a big change. She has this illness. She's sick. She's got a little baby boy with her. But I laughed too, because she was working at Mervin's. Dude, that was our spot, man. I spent so much of my childhood at Mervin's. My mom, she was an avid. My mom knew everybody at Mervin's.
Do they have it anymore?
No, they don't have Mervin's anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. The Mervin's in my hometown is now an LA Fitness.
Oh, well, dang.
So, yeah, it's a gigantic gym. But when it said Mervin's, it was like, oh,
yeah.
I can just imagine mom
Run
working
back
at
the
Mervin's.
feelings.
Yeah, I'm just, just talking about, hey, how's it going? But no, that chapter, going back to Cali. I just imagine you being a young boy, because, even though my wife doesn't have any health issues or complications, I have a son that was about the same age that you were, according to your mom and that. And I'm like, man, like 8-year-old, 7, 8, 9-year-old little boy watches mom like that. There's no way the brain can process what's happening, but that it's real. Like, your mom wasn't playing. She wasn't joking when she was, quiet in her room and then crying and having those moments. You knew that was something that could not be explained in words, but it could be explained in meaning, like in feeling. You could feel that. And how you use that to be different. And I liked also too that you didn't say any hurtful words about your dad. Right. Said he made some choices, and those choices were not what you choose to make. Right. So in that sense, he has inspired you in a great way, just not the way that you want to necessarily inspire your kids right off the jump.
Exactly.
And that leads me to another question. My next question is about your dad. Is you'd mentioned to me a long time ago that you'd off and on have some connection with him, some relationship, and eventually you started to get to know him a little bit better. Right now, in your life, can you say there's some things about you that you're like, I am like my dad in this way? Because I had a hard time. My mom was my biological mom, I was someone I was so embarrassed with, because she chose to give me up. And the way I saw it, she chose drugs over me. And so for me, I don't know if you remember, we talked about that a long time ago, and I knew who she was. She came in and out of my life, but usually when she was in my life, it was pretty dramatic and not a fun time. But as I got older, I started to get a relationship with her, but I could keep her at arm's distance.
Right.
I couldn't keep her that close because I didn't trust her.
I feel you.
So my question for you is that when I had a deep conversation with my mom, finally, I was in my 20s. I remember getting off the phone, and the girlfriend I was talking to at that time, she's like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm tripping out. She goes, why? I'm like, I just had a long conversation with my mom. She's like, was it okay? I'm like, it was great. Like, I'm her son. It blew my mind that I'm like, I know I came from you. She said things to me, and there was something about, it was so weird to not know her and to know her so well and her to know me.
That's what
so my question is for you is, even though your dad hasn't been a huge part of your life, is there ways you're like, oh, I am my father's son?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, me too.
Unfortunately, yes. My dad, now that I'm interacting with him, I do, like you mentioned, keep at arm's distance. But we did have that point where I just poured it all out to him. It was a part where I basically was like, man, you was never there for me. And
you said be honest with him.
I was honest, and it was the first time I was honest with him. And he broke down crying. I broke down crying. And he was like, son, which I remember, but I don't remember. His father passed away when I was very young. And so my dad had a lot of success. And then when that success was gone, his father passed away. His career's gone. Nobody's talking to him. So he went into a deep depression. He turned to drugs, and those drugs ultimately led him into prison. And so he was dealing with a whole bunch of mental health issues that I didn't know. I wasn't privy to him. And so I'm having
thought he just didn't want you.
I thought he didn't want me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that way at all. It was just more of he was dealing with his own demons that he had to face. And unfortunately, it didn't it had to wait like 20 years later down the line to get to know him. But, you know, I had that conversation with him, and I finally was like, man, I am kind of like this dude in a way. Like, damn. And so, like, musically, he sends me music like almost every other day, like old bands, old guitar strings. I'm like, dang, maybe that's where I get my music here from.
Yeah.
And then, you know, my mom did the same thing. I was like, well, maybe that's where I'm musically inclined. And so, yeah, I see a lot of stuff from him. The gift of the gab. My dad, this dude, man, he can talk your ear off. He can talk your ear off.
I was gonna say, because your mom had a sweetheart conversation about her, but she could never be a hustler.
Mm-mm. Like,
because you do have that side where if you wanted to, you could use your powers for evil.
Oh, for
instead
sure.
of good.
Mm-hmm. And my dad, you know, I feel like he encompasses that. He at times
he could save the world or he could ruin it. It just depends because
really
he's very
quick.
talented in that way.
Yeah, and his gift of gab can be, he knows how to use words to swing different things to use it against him. And so I learned from a lot of his mistakes. And one thing that's true to my dad, I'll be honest with you, he would never, no matter how much the world is on top of him or he's on top of the world, he would never, his name to him, he still knows, he still feels like he's the great. No matter how everybody else sees him, he's true to who he is. I am Kenneth Scott the great. No matter if he's the poorest guy, he's like, I'm the great. Like, his confidence is at such a high level, like, I'm the great no matter, you know, what life has dealt me with. And I'm like, man, I like that confidence. And so now when I'm thinking about certain things, when I may feel a certain way and the reality's not there, I'm like, man, you're right. I mean, he calls me the magnificent because I'm like, I don't want to be the great, you know? So he calls me the magnificent. And so I'm like, man, you know what? I am who I am, you know? And so it gives me that confidence.
So it sounds like he's basically, he's ingrained it into himself, and he's trying to ingrain it inside of you, because even though you didn't have those influences in your young age, is that even when you're down, even when you're not at your best, when you're struggling this and that and the other, your potential and your capability is always magnificent. That's always great.
Right.
Even if you're not in that spot right now, you can get back there.
For sure. And it was kind of like we were alluding to earlier, like you have this destination and you're just going in courses like this in your life. And so, you know, you making sure who you are is always right there. You're always going to have like a direction in which you go towards. And so that's what my dad just kind of reminds me of, like, okay, I'm still the magnificent. No matter how many times I failed, how many risks I've taken, and it just completely is horrible, I'm still who I am. So,
well, the takeaways from your dad, the life experiences with your mom, has definitely made you the magnificent, in my opinion.
I appreciate it.
I want to end with just asking you, you know, one last question. And this is another heartfelt question. And being a father, I think about this a lot with my kids, because,
right,
you know, because my kids aren't going to get to know, have an adult relationship with my mom, you know, and, you know, there's a lot of things that they're just going to, you know, they'll be hanging out with their friends, like, oh, your grandma and grandpa's here, you know, it's just, that's a tough one. You know what I mean? That's a real tough one. So
real tough.
I want to ask you, is your legacy is really a part of your mom's legacy.
For sure.
Like, they're connected. You obviously know that you want to be remembered as a certain type of way, right? So my question is, how do you want to be remembered, and how do you want your kids to know they're like your mom?
Man.
Take your time.
So I'll tell you a story. So let me see the book real quick. So, you know, obviously earlier this year in February, this is when I published the book. And so I remember I got the author's copy just like this. And I'm sitting in my office, and my oldest, Brooklyn, comes running in and sits on my lap. So I got the author's copy in my hand like this, and Brooklyn sitting on my lap. She looks down. She looks at me. She says, "Daddy, who's this?" At that moment, I just had to pause. And I got emotional because if you ask anybody in my family, the one thing that my mother ever wanted was granddaughters. And I have 2 of them. But she's not here to see it. And she passed away less than a year than Brooklyn was born. And so that situation hit me hard. And so as Brooklyn sit on my lap and tears just falling down my face, Brooklyn just grabs my face and starts wiping my tears. And this freaking tripped me out. She said, "Daddy, it's all right." And then she went to kiss the book. And it was as if she knew it was all right, meaning my mother. And so even though she's physically gone, this right here, I can be able to teach her the things that my mother embodied in everything in life.
And to hear your daughter say, "Daddy, it's going to be all right," you're like, how does she know to say that to me right now? That's what my mom always said to me.
Exactly. And so when you ask, how would you be remembered? How would the legacy live on? It's through sharing her story consistently, reminding her, showing her pictures. Like, this is your grandma too. You have 2 of them. Well, she has a couple of them. But, but this is your grandma. This is what she went through. This is how I got here. This is what I stand on. And here's the things you're going to stand on too. And so this right here, man, to know her grandmother's journey, to have to fight through what she had to fight through, I would have gave up a long time ago. To last 24 years through it.
Dude.
Man,
yeah.
I seen her through I remember
I feel on that one, man.
Nights where I had to carry her on my back going up flight of stairs, her feet just swelling up like sausages. Like, man, I remember those moments, just her not eating so I can eat. Our dinner table was an ironing board, and we used to get the crates from the grocery store and put it as chairs. Like, I remember all those moments, man, and it's just, I laugh about it now. It's like, man, I remember those. Those are some spectacular moments. But, this right here is how I keep her name alive, keep her constant as a reminder for my kids to stand strong. That's really what it is.
Every mom I've ever met, one of their greatest fears is that there'd be one day or one moment of their children's life that their children's doubted if she loved them. And your mom obviously knows you love her. Mm-hmm. She knows that she loves her grandchildren even though she's not here with them. Mm-hmm. But it's really cool for me to hear you say those things because, like I said, I didn't prepare you with those questions.
Right.
I'm going to have to ask those questions.
Man, for real.
I was like, we're going to have to get sponsored by Kleenex again.
Man, for real.
Kleenex. And but when you said that about your daughter saying that and saying, "Dad, it's going to be all right," it's moments like that. You're like, oh man,
like
that.
Come on, man.
Like it's too real and it's too special. And for her to kiss your mom's face in that, your mom doesn't want to be forgotten. Right. And obviously she'll never be forgotten because you're telling the story, and your daughters will hear all the great stories. And also, too, they will get to know that they're magnificent and they're great, too, not just because they say it, because they have stories and accounts of someone that they came from did it.
Yep.
And I think that's what parents, when I'm talking with parents, say, I don't want them to just show their kids their stresses and their worries. I want them to show their kids also that, they can turn their pain and their, all those hardships also into some of the best things that they've been through or the best lessons, at least.
True. The craziest thing, I was talking with Brandon earlier today, it was like, they had me in the must student section at the game, and during the transition from third and fourth quarter, it's a moment of loudness. And so I remember the University of Utah football team, they asked me, "Hey, do you have a picture of your mom of the football jersey and stuff?" So we want to put it up there. So it's happening. And so all I can think about is, like, we was talking earlier, it's like, man, my mom loved my music. She jammed it or whatever. And it's like, she's not there, obviously, but, like, she was in that stadium. We was going hard. Like, that performance on that field, like, it was just a bigger moment to me than everything else. And then, like I was telling Brandon earlier, to see Brandon on that field, doing his little, encompassing that Brit out there. Then my scholarship, you was out there, what I'm saying? Everybody was there for the moment. Like, that's like stuff you can't make up. And so that's something I'll never forget. Just the people that I have good relationships with was there in the moment where, man, I'll never forget. So that was awesome.
Yeah, those moments needed all those people. And also, too, even though she's not there, it's like, Mom, I forgot.
Like we here. You know what I'm saying? Like, we here.
Yeah, I've never even seen a halftime before. You're usually in the locker room.
In the locker room getting yelled at or something.
Yep.
Man.
Well, Kenneth, I just want to thank you so much for being the first guest here in OG Therapy.
For sure.
I have a feeling that our paths will be crossing a lot more in the future. And, you know, I want to thank you, too, for being willing to be one of my very first OG Therapy certified coaches. Yes, and, you know, I was talking to Kenneth, and I said, I'm doing this thing with OG Therapy. It's not just a podcast, but ultimately want to take all the cool stuff I've learned from mental health and psychology and 23 years of helping people, my life experiences, but I want to give people like you and other people out there, just give you my information, and then you can go run with it, do whatever you want to change the world in your own way. So thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you. By the way, when you get certified, we're going to have you come back and talk about what you went through, because for those people out there that want to eventually, you know, learn some stuff from some old dude like me, we may have that opportunity through OG Therapy certification in the future, but we'll talk about that later on in the future. For now, Kenneth, thank you for being here, man. I love you.
Man, love you too.
An amazing performance yesterday.
Thank you.
We're all proud of you and can't look forward to seeing your TED Talk when it comes out.
I can't wait either. Thank you. Appreciate you for everything. Always in my corner, so thank you.
Always. Thank you for coming in business here at OG Therapy. And until next time, be cool. And thank you for just helping us to light the fight.